and welcome to this episode of Mindset Mentoring for Athletes, Families, and Entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Coach Chuck. In this episode, we'll be having an inspiring conversation with Jason Zygadlo, founder of Build Your Own Brand, as we delve into the intersection of personal adversity, professional success, and mental wellness. With a background in medical device sales and a life journey marked by significant challenges, including battling cancer, Jason brings unique insights into the power of personal branding and resilience. In this episode, we explore how individuals, particularly high school and college students, can stand out in today's competitive landscape by embracing their uniqueness and leveraging their life experiences. Jason shares his strategies for dealing with stress and anxiety, the importance of community service, and his passion for helping others achieve their full potential through effective branding and mentorship. So stay tuned for that.
According to the CDC in 2023, over 10 million teenagers reported experiencing persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. 10 million. And it's not just teenagers. Over 51 million adults struggle with mental health challenges every single year. Parents, this isn't just statistics. It's our children. It's us. And it's a wake-up call. But here's the thing. Knowledge and awareness is a first step to change. Yet the most important knowledge, the kind that can truly transform lives, is rarely taught. It's not about memorizing facts or getting perfect grades. It's about learning how to train your mindset. At the Unstoppable Mindset Masterclass, we'll teach you and your family how to take control, how to overcome limiting beliefs, tackle financial stress, and rise above the challenges that hold you back. You will gain tools to build unshakable confidence, foster resilience and grit to handle life's toughest moments, and turn habits into rituals that drive lasting change. Imagine the relief of watching your teenager face life with hope instead of hopelessness. Imagine equipping them and yourself with the mindset to not just survive but thrive. Visit unstoppablemindsetmasterclass.com and register to take the first step towards your transformation.
Welcome back, and today's episode, we're joined by Jason Zygadlo, a seasoned entrepreneur, cancer survivor, and visionary behind Build Your Own Brand. Jason's journey through overcoming personal health challenges and his expertise in the highly competitive field of medical device sales have equipped him with unparalleled insights into resilience and branding. Today, he'll share how these experiences have shaped his approach to helping others stand out and succeed in both life and business. Let's dive into how we all can learn and be memorable, impactful, following Jason's lead in turning adversities into assets. So let's welcome Jason to the show. Welcome.
Coach Chuck, good to see you. Happy Thursday.
Yes, happy Thursday. It's an honor to have you here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise.
Let's kind of begin by just having you give a little bit of background about kind of who you are, maybe some of those, formative years, where you come from, and how you maybe got into the sales field.
Yeah, great question. So my name's Jason Zygadlo. I grew up primarily in Michigan, in Kalamazoo, Portage, Michigan, actually, right outside of Kalamazoo, and moved here when I was in high school. That's always a challenge, Chuck. When you move, when you're in high school, you have established friends and, just playing sports and different things like that. It's a tough time to make that change. And so I graduated here in Ohio and then ended up attending Kent State University and just had a wonderful experience in college. I'm a first generation college graduate and just took college very, very serious. I wanted to just get as much out of it as I possibly could. And in addition to the classroom part of it, I spent a ton of time investing in different organizations. And I didn't want to just be a member of an organization. I wanted to be on the executive board and in a leadership role because I felt like there was so much opportunity for me to gain while at the university that I wanted to I was a sponge and just wanted to suck it all up. And so I spent a ton of time, putting energy into my fraternity, and I was an RA on campus I was the student leader of the year. I organized a clothing drive that raised over 3,000 pounds that we could then donate back to the local community. And I was always just kind of looking for creative ways to, really help my fraternity stand out, help myself stand out, and just really try to build up my resume and strengthen it as much as I possibly could, because I knew the 4 years would go quickly and then it would be time to find a job in the big bad world of, the real world, I guess I should say. So, yeah, I mean, I think that is a little bit about kind of how I got to where I am. After graduation, I wanted to get into sales. I had a fraternity brother that was a pharmaceutical sales rep, and he had constantly talked about it being a great industry. I knew nothing about it. Again, I was a first generation college graduate. I couldn't really go back home and ask for advice to any of my family because no one really knew anything. My father was a construction worker. He poured cement, poured concrete. My mom stayed at home. And so I did a lot of learning and exploring on my own. Was always very curious. Was always, of the belief and mindset that even though we didn't have the money to go to college, 30 other thousand students were going to college, not because their parents were paying for it. I too was going to figure out a way to make this work. And so I started to explore post-graduation. How do I get into pharmaceutical sales? Because I really didn't know much else other than a fraternity brother, as I mentioned, told me it could be a really good fit for me. And I saw that he was doing very well. The problem was I didn't have any experience. And so I was applying like everyone else online. There's no LinkedIn yet. And so after being rejected over and over, I thought, I have to do things a little bit outside of my comfort zone and a little bit more unique and creative and memorable. And so I printed up some business cards that simply had my name, my phone number, my email, and I bought some shiny folders. I put my resume in the folders, and then I proceeded to hang out in medical office buildings where I knew pharmaceutical reps would be coming to visit customers. And back in the early 2000s, it was the Chevy Impalas and Ford Tauruses. Those were the company cars. And anytime I saw anyone get out of one of those cars and go to their trunk and load it up with pens and samples, I would simply go up to them and just basically say, hey, my name is Jason. I would provide an introduction. I would share with them what I was trying to accomplish, which was, getting into the industry, but really didn't know how. And I was hopeful that perhaps they would pass my resume along to one of their managers. And after doing this for a little while, little did I know, when someone got out of the passenger seat, it was a sales manager doing a field visit or a ride along with their sales rep for the day. And you can only imagine how a sales manager was looking at me, this young, gritty, creative, tenacious guy trying to figure out a way to break into the industry. That right there was really kind of what took my career and started to really build some momentum and put me on a trajectory that, was extremely positive.
Wow, there's some really insightful things you just said there. Before I start talking a little bit more about that whole creative approach to stand out, the idea that being the first from your family to get to college, so that in itself kind of speaking volumes. Now, in that family background, was that something that had been kind of poo-pooed, or just financial restraints, all that? What was it that kind of got you to go to college? And was there any subtle pressures not to go? Was there some of those kind of like, oh, you don't want to go be a college boy, or any of that kind of stuff? Or was it very supportive?
No, it's a great question. I love my parents, and I was very close with my mom, very close. And I love my mom, but she was always kind of glass half empty, right? And so, I remember these conversations of, how are you going to pay for this? We obviously can't really help you that much. Your buddies are going off and getting jobs and getting an apartment and getting a nice car. Like, are you sure that going off to college is the right move? And I've got to tell you, being surrounded by some really successful parents, friends, I've always looked at that like, wow, again, I learned a lot. I think sometimes what you learn from parents that come from the blue collar kind of space and background and mentality. I mean, I learned a lot of hard work, but I also, financially speaking, learned a lot about what not to do and how not to, manage money. And so I learned so many different lessons, but I was always so inspired by some of the successful parents of my buddies and looking at how they've created a lifestyle for their own respective families. And I don't want to say I was envious of that, maybe a little bit, but I always kept telling myself, I will be able to figure out a way to do this for my own family. I mean, at whatever it takes. And that was just the mindset that I had. I went in, as I mentioned earlier, Chuck, I became an RA to offset some of the costs of college. So I paid for my room and board for a little while. I did go to the community college for a year or so, a little longer than a year, because I wanted to get some of those basic courses that I could transfer into the Kent State College with, and not have to repeat those courses, and did it at a less expensive level. So I was looking for all of these strategic and creative ways to just continuously help set myself up for success. But my parents were constantly planting those negative seeds of, how are you going to pay for this even after you get out of here, college that is, and you're going to have student loans like crazy. And and I remember I worked every summer to try to offset some of those costs. I did the RA thing. I was looking for any way I possibly could to just help reduce the costs, but all with the mindset of, again, every student that goes here doesn't have parents paying for them to go here. There are students like me, probably more so students like me, that are betting on themselves. They're going to figure it out. And that's just how I approached it. So, yeah, it wasn't easy. I sometimes would almost even be apprehensive of bringing up college and the cost and different things like that, because I knew my parents would jump on that, and it would just mentally beat me down if I would allow that to just kind of stay in my own headspace. So I did everything I could to stay the course, and it really, I think it turned out well for me. So I just, super grateful that I just kind of stuck with it and had that mindset and belief that, I wasn't, even though they're my parents, right? I mean, and you want to take their advice, but I looked at how we grew up, and I looked at some things that I just thought, wow, when I become of age, I'm going to do that a little bit differently. And so, yeah, I mean, I think good lessons regardless, but I'm very, very grateful and blessed that I decided to just kind of stick with it and bet on myself.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Over the years, lots of parents try to, want to protect our kids and don't want them to get disappointed, don't want them, get into debt, all kind of these sort of things that people who haven't been to college. And I've heard it from students who say their parents are saying these things, those first generation. Sometimes there's more negative to it than just trying to protect your kid. In some of the more dysfunctional families that I've had to work with, but it can be really challenging for that first person to break that mold. And I had 3 fraternity brothers, and 2 of them were also my longtime high school friends, and they were the oldest child, and none of their parents had gone to college. One of their parents was a high school dropout. There was no history there. They all went on to college. 2 of them have become entrepreneurs. One of them incredibly successful, like He's a CEO of a corporation right now. He was a scientist, and he's a serial entrepreneur, drug industry, so pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
But they also, each one of them had a younger brother just below them, age-wise, grade-wise, who struggled in life, like really serious, hardcore struggles in life. And I've been fascinated by that with so much of those family dynamics where each one of those older ones broke the mold, but their immediate younger brother really struggled. But the next youngest child after that followed suit with the oldest brother.
Oh, wow.
Fascinating story.
Yeah, very much so.
I kind of digress a little bit there, but that conversation just kind of made me think a little bit about that. So,
well, to speak to that, I mean, I have a younger brother. He's 8 years younger. He went to college for maybe a semester. It wasn't for him. I think he's wired a little bit more like my parents, in the sense that, sometimes, and I don't want to say I was rebellious in any way, that really wasn't the case, but it was more so, even though my mom and dad said, hey, look, I don't know how you're going to pay for that. This is scary. We can't help you. That didn't deter me. It was almost more of a challenge to want to go do it, where I think, on the contrary, my brother, similarly to my parents, a little more passive, was afraid to embrace the difficulty of the college grind. And it wasn't for him. And that's okay. It's not for everyone. Now he works in a factory. He's an hourly guy. And I often think, I just wish maybe he would have challenged himself a little bit more, pushed himself. But I do think that constant messaging from my parents, kind of suppressed him a little bit mentally, and kind of took the wind out of his sails. We're completely different personalities. Great guy, works very hard, but I just, you see that, and sometimes your heart goes out to those guys because they do work so hard, and I wish he would have had a little bit of an easier path, and would have bet on himself a little bit more, because I think he has the potential. I think it's just, when you're getting that feedback from your parents or anyone that you know and you like and you trust, it can be hard to break out of that and to think beyond that. And so again, I think from my family dynamics, I was the black sheep. But again, just wired a little bit differently, and learned from my parents in what they did. And again, as I said earlier, those are some things that I didn't want to do, and there's some paths that I didn't want to follow in. And so that was really the big motivator for me.
You also find it interesting in your case that of all the fields to go into, choosing sales, that's a tough industry, right? You get lots of no's, lots of rejections, that's hard to deal with negativity for a lot of people. It can be really hard things. So what is it, do you think, that first led you kind of seeking that out, and then you were in that industry for a number of years? So can you kind of talk about that mindset that helps you, one, choose it, why that field, and then how you managed to deal with that kind of, tough business.
Yeah, it's a tough business. It's a cutthroat business. That's for sure. Again, I think it goes back to that betting on myself, the challenge. I'm a type A guy. When I learned the opportunity and the potential, and how lucrative some of these sales jobs could be, that was attractive to me. I think there's some broadness to having a business degree, but I also think that, the sales kind of piece and sliver of this business degree really allowed me the opportunity to just run and, eat what I kill, so to speak. I really liked that. I thrived in that environment. I think a lot of it has to do with maybe some of the kind of psychology of getting through college and just figuring that out. And I will tell you, I mean, it was very humbling to once then get the job in pharmaceutical sales and now go, wow, I'm not really a very science oriented guy. I don't know how to pronounce a lot of these words. How am I going to be successful in this? What did I just get myself into? But all the while also knowing, wow, you made it. I mean, there's a lot of people scrapping to get into this industry. You've now figured out a way to do that. Let's just go tackle it, and knock it out. And that was the approach that I took. I feel like I utilized my resources very well. Other colleagues who have been doing the job for a while and tapping into them, and being very open and honest and transparent with my manager. He was a very supportive guy. He saw, I think, potential in me that I didn't even maybe know that I had. Here I am. I mean, now I have this big boy job, company car, lots of wonderful perks right out of college. I mean, I was doing pretty well, comparatively speaking, to some of my peers. And I was just like overwhelmed with joy and excitement, and just seeing all the fruits of my labor, starting to kind of now come together. And I've always had this, I wasn't always the smartest guy. I felt like I would compete with anyone when it came to work. I wasn't going to be outworked. And that's really kind of how I made my name, I think, in the business, with, the example of standing out in the parking lot and handing out my resumes. I always wanted to be unique and different and memorable, and, break out of this sea of sameness. I feel like oftentimes everyone does things the same way over and over. And I was always looking for that creative spin that I can put on myself, or how I approached things. And so, a friend of mine says, sometimes better isn't better. Sometimes being a little bit different is better. And I do believe that. I mean, I think we all live in a time and a place now where attention is the new currency. There's a lot of noise. You've got to figure out a way to stand out, be different, be memorable. Similarly, I think I told you this story too, Chuck, where I only spent a very short period of time in pharmaceutical sales. I didn't love it. I wanted to get into medical device sales. That's where I heard the real money was. That's where I heard like the kind of next kind of step or leap in the medical sales career was. And I was pursuing those jobs. And very similarly, I was being told, hey, you're a pharmaceutical rep. You don't sell anything. You drop off lunches. You bring samples. And that's not sales. We want sales guys and gals. And that's when I remember kind of the light bulb flipping off. And I'm like, exactly. That's partly why I want out of pharmaceutical sales. I've learned so much, built confidence to approach doctors and have meaningful conversations, and learn how to build well-rounded relationships with the entire office staff, not just doctors, but nurses and receptionists and, everyone that goes into the process, and being genuine and authentic in my approach. But then being rejected multiple times, trying to get into this medical sales arena, it was extremely difficult. So I went back to the drawing board. I had an upcoming interview. I went to the local mall, Chuck. I bought a pair of scrubs because I knew the product that I would potentially be selling if I earned the job. It was a product that was in the operating room and it was in the intensive care unit. And so what do? I take those scrubs, I put them on, I take my suit off. I drive an hour out to my pharmaceutical territory. And in the evening times, a lot of the pharmaceutical doctors, they were internal medicine doctors, they would round on their patients in the hospitals in the evening. And I remember one particular evening, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to the intensive care unit and I'm going to try to get in there so I can interview a nurse to learn about these products. And so I remember going up to the second floor. I remember a sign that says, do not enter. And I held my breath. I pushed the button. I walk in. And I hear all this beeping, and I'm like, what did I get myself into? And it just so happens that I see a doctor that I know, and he's like, what the hell are you doing here? And why are you in scrubs? And I proceed to tell him that I have this upcoming interview. Here's the product I'd be selling. Can you show me what they look like? Can you tell me how they work? I need to know everything. I wanted to take as many notes as I could and take them with me to the interview. And so he calls a nurse over, and I'm telling you, there's smoke coming off the paper. I'm learning as much as I could. And I show up to that interview, and I say, hey, before we get started, can I share a quick story? Hiring manager says, absolutely. What do you got? I pull the bag of scrubs out with the receipt to validate the story that I was about to tell, because it's pretty out there. And I also pulled out all my notes, and I pulled out the business card of the nurse that I spoke with. And she was kind enough to say, have the hiring manager reach out to me if at any moment he doesn't, believe the story or whatever. And this hiring manager, it was like I had punched him right square in the head. And he was just like, wait, you did what? And then I proceeded to tell him how I broke into pharmaceuticals. And, from there, Chuck, the rest is history. I earned that job. And then I spent almost the next 2 decades selling medical devices, primarily in the cardiac and vascular space. But I had pivoted after my diagnosis of cancer in 2019. And I started to sell some oncology products for just a few years. But it was that diagnosis that really kind of tugged at me and pulled at me in ways where I wanted to then really help people. In that 20 years that I've been selling medical devices, my alma mater, I serve on the board at Kent State University. I do a lot of speaking at the university and multiple universities in the area, just about telling your story and how to be different and memorable. And I've gotten so much satisfaction out of helping people brand themselves from all backgrounds and teaching them how to sell themselves and position themselves in ways to strengthen their ability, to boost their confidence, to build credibility, and teaching them how to get their own high-level jobs. And that's kind of where this build your own brand thing comes in and what I'm doing presently. But, it was just over anecdotally helping so many people over the last 20 years or so. My friends and family have anointed me as the guy for years to say, hey, I have this upcoming interview. Can you help me? I've watched you get into these jobs that you had no business really getting into, but I need help. I want help. And so now that's my mission. Is I'm working with businesses, I'm working with individuals, but all really helping people level up in how they tell their story, how they sell themselves. Because I think even when I was in sales leadership in that 2-decade span, not only did I interview a lot of people, but I also have had multiple jobs where I've had to interview a lot. And each time it was equally difficult to earn that next job. But I figured out a blueprint that I think works in terms of just how you're able to sell yourself. And so now I spend a lot of time helping college students, fresh graduates, prepare to enter the market and how they can kind of look the part right after graduation. And I'm working with some VP levels. There's a VP of finance that I'm working with at a big company. And, again, similarly, just really a bright guy, but just doesn't know how to take all that he's done and position it in a way to strengthen his chances of landing his next opportunity. So I said a lot there. I'll pause. But yeah, that's kind of how it's all evolved.
I love that. There are, and I want to delve in a lot more about what it is you're doing, because I think that is such an important, and it's a great niche. I think it's really valuable. But I do want to go back just for a moment in the cancer aspect and
Yeah.
how that, and in part, I'm very, well, my wife passed away of cancer. So cancer it's it's an enemy, so to speak. So I'm
Yeah.
very kind of interested in hearing how that experience of becoming a cancer survivor shaped you in this direction that you now took. And I just wondered if maybe you could just delve into a little bit more about how that might have shifted any of your thinking or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, it was certainly a devastating diagnosis. I had been having some signs and symptoms for several months, unfortunately, and no one could seem to figure out what was going on with me. And if it wasn't for me being my own advocate, and I think being in the medical device sales space and working around physicians and having conversations and learning how to just continuously push to be my own advocate, I don't know how I would have ended up. But I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2019. Thankfully, praise God, I just celebrated my 5-year anniversary on February 24th. So, cancer folks in this little fraternity, 5 years tends to be the magic number. If you can get to that number, that's a real good sign. And so, I'm grateful that I just had the ability to celebrate that. But yeah, after the diagnosis, I thought maybe the real calling for me was to work in oncology. So I left the cardiac space in sales and pivoted, actually working with breast surgeons, and found that job to be extremely rewarding. I lost my mom, sadly. She had breast cancer twice. She passed away almost 3 years ago here, almost to the day, or 2 years, excuse me. And it felt like meaningful work because of my own diagnosis, and couple that with my mom's diagnosis. So selling in the breast cancer space was absolutely rewarding and phenomenal. I still, though, there was this kind of tug and pull internally as to, even when I'm doing really well, and I've had a pretty successful medical sales career, I almost feel like most of these companies, it's never enough. And when I'm having, God forbid, a down quarter or down couple quarters, you almost are in fear of your job because it is so cutthroat. And, I have such a positive wife and an encouraging wife who said, look, do you still want to do that work? And if you do, that's great. But I see how excited you get when you help people get jobs. And, I would just encourage you to take some time to reflect and see if, this is the path you still want to stay on, selling medical stuff. I'd started with another company after the breast company, and it was a very short-lived. I loved, the startup companies, Chuck, high risk, high reward. Again, it's kind of who I am, my personality. And they ran out of funding in like 60 days. So I was displaced. I just left a really good job in the breast cancer space now to go to the startup company. And it was like, whoa, I mean, here I am now on a call with HR, and they're telling me, we're moving on. We're, kind of collapsing this and that. And I'm affected by this. And I'm like, I just came here. And, I looked at it as that, not pink slip, but more like blank canvas. Now maybe this is the time for me to kick around this build your own brand idea. Maybe now there is something to the timing of how all of this is aligning. And you know what? Maybe I need to bet on myself again. How can I continue to preach to the clients that I work with and even to my own family about comfort being the enemy of growth, and you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And yet here I am, perhaps maybe staying in this industry because it feels safe. It's a great income. I'm hitting my stride, things are going really well, but am I really fulfilled? And I think the diagnosis probably helped me question some of that. Really kind of doing meaningful and purposeful work. Not that selling medical devices was not that. I've sold some really great devices. But the reality was, anecdotally helping so many people that I have over the years and helping college students and getting people just boosted and just injecting them with confidence to go attack the job that they want, that stuff gets me fired up more so than putting my widget into hospitals, especially at this stage of my career. And so that's how it was launched. You know, I am of the belief and opinion people will spend money and they're excited to tell you they had a resume written and, you know, they spent all this money. And the reality is, you need a resume. There's no question about that. But I do believe that a resume's never gotten anyone a job. A resume's gotten you in front of someone that can give you a job. But you have to know how to do this. You've got 45 minutes to an hour, whether it's virtually or in person, to connect with someone, to build trust, and to showcase your talent. And how are you doing that? And I mean, I think that's the real way to win and perform at a high level and attack so that you can get the job that you want. And I love this type of work. You know, as I said, I've now made it my mission to want to help people of all levels just level up in how they tell their story, because I think college students aren't taught that after they leave. They're given this degree, and then it's up to you as the student to now go figure out how to leverage that. Why isn't there a course on how to build up who you are and all the accomplishments that you've done while at college, and then leverage that in the interview process? And, you know, there's some tools that we work on and put together, 180-day business plan proactively. We build a legacy list and really examine all of the wonderful work that you've done, whether you were an athlete, you were in a fraternity, you were in student organizations, all of these things, because all of that makes up who you are. And you're so much more than what a paper says. I mean, heck, we can have AI write a pretty good resume these days, or we can even have someone, you know, the best resume writer in the world write a resume. The problem is this, Chuck: resumes are subjective. So I could read a resume and go, wow, this Chuck guy, he's a bright guy, sharp guy, can't wait to meet him. And then I meet you, and then who is this guy? Who let him in the door? Or on the contrary, I have a colleague that goes, wow, this Chuck guy looks terrible on paper. There's just so much subjectivity. The real, you know, investment needs to be made in how you represent yourself. If you're getting interviews, your resume is doing its job. But if you're not getting the job, there's a disconnect somewhere. And that's with this. So, you know, I encourage people to really think long and hard about how they're, you know, figuring out ways to be different and memorable in the interview process, because those are the people getting the jobs. And when I was a part of any hiring, those were the guys and gals that I looked for.
You know, I've had my youngest son just recently got through college. He's got 3 older siblings. They have lots of friends. So I've had lots of conversations with people who've, you know, fairly recently gotten through college. And what you said earlier about they aren't taught the things that they really need to get the jobs after. It's like, you know, it's like every college has these departments that are supposed to help you, you know, get the interviews and prepare resumes and do all these things, but there's things missing. And I love what you are talking about with some of that. And, you know, obviously as a mindset guy, so like when you look at, all right, so when I talk with entrepreneurs, right, so families, entrepreneurs, athletes, I work with all three. But like when I talk with entrepreneurs, and there's that statistic that half of all entrepreneurs are out of business within the first 5 years. And then why? You look at the 3 major reasons why, and there's things like marketing problems, financial challenges, leadership issues. And behind every one of those is mindset, because your mindset influences your ability to make decisions, to deal with the stress and the emotions which influence your decision making. All of that, all the stuff kind of behind the scene is your mindset. But when you look at what people invest their money in, it's not mindset training. And,
Yeah.
you know, so when you hit, whether it's high school kids trying to get into college or college kids trying to get into the work world, their mindset is going to be behind so much of how they present themselves and how they carry themselves, all those subtle things. But adding a strategy on how to go about doing things, now, now you're really putting things together, right? And I,
Right.
I often share this story because it's so, I it's a perfect metaphor, I think, of what we're talking about. After my wife passed away, we were having, you know, a gathering at our house after the service and all. And we have a big backyard, and there was going to be quite a few people coming. And I obviously wanted, you know, I wanted the yard to look good. And there's one spot in particular that my wife and I had really wanted to have a garden. And
Mm.
we had planted plants, but we didn't have a garden, right? We didn't like, and I'm like, I'm gonna fix that. But I didn't, you know, I got some books on gardening because my wife and I had always said, you know, we want to have a garden, so I had books on gardening. But I'm looking through those, but that wasn't going to cut it. Now my sister happens to be a very good gardener, very knowledgeable. So I asked her to come down, and she's helping me, and she's like even pointing out, oh, yeah, those weeds right there, those roots go deep. We really got to, like, you can't just yank them out. You got to dig
Yeah.
down and really dig those out. Some of the other weeds were surface weeds, and you can kind of just pull those out. And oh, that's a nice wildflower. That you might want to keep that because that will bloom at a certain time of year. And give me advice on what to plant. And when we're done, man, it was beautiful. You know, it was there honoring my wife. It was beautiful.
I love it.
Well, the next, I actually had an opportunity. This was in the winter of 2023 to change my living situation. I kind of joke because I had, you know, 20 something year old kids and they're still living at home. I always joke that it was easier for me to move out than kick them out. So I had a new opportunity. I left them the house, and they're still there. They got a couple roommates in there. They take care of the house. And that early summer, I don't live that far away, but early summer, I came back to the house. It's probably my first time going out into the backyard, and it was like a punch to the gut because there was the garden totally overgrown by weeds.
Uh,
And at first I was a little angry at my kids, but no, that was my garden. That was my responsibility. And if I don't regularly weed the garden, and if I don't fertilize it and feed it, the weeds are going to choke out the beauty of it. And
yeah.
that is so applicable to all of us with our mindset. And when people want to go get that job, get into that right college, they need to make sure they've weeded their garden so that the beauty that they really have inside shows through because you will see it, you know? And then when you have the strategy like you provide, when you have that blueprint, which is what my sister helped me provide,
Yeah.
when you put all that together, man, so that's why I
What a
love
neat
what you're
story.
doing.
It makes so much sense, Chuck. I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah, and you know, I really would love to talk a little bit more. I could probably go quite a while with this interview, so I'm going to be a little mindful of the time. But if you could just kind of talk a little bit more, because were sharing some of those things that you were talking about trying to help them do. But I'm
Yeah.
imagining it's a lot more than just preparing for an interview, right? It's trying to showcase who they are and ways that help make who they are stand out. Is that a good way
Yeah.
of kind of saying it?
You're absolutely right on. You're spot on. I mean, I think, for me, I'm a very, very detail oriented guy. When I would interview people, I would pay attention to how, folks would pull their resume out of their bag. I mean, that detailed. Um, I think that, for me and how I always represented myself, it was how can I, again, be a little bit more unique and different and memorable, kind of like, I'm not asking anyone to stand out in parking lots and loiter around for Chevy Impalas and Ford Tauruses, not asking anyone to break into intensive care units and, do what I did. But, what are you doing now? What are you thinking about doing to just kind of help separate yourself from the rest of the pack? And, when it comes to interviewing, I think a lot of that is what are the questions you're asking? How are you preparing for those questions? Because there's a lot of psychology, there's a lot of optics, and there's a lot of just, strategy in how you put all this stuff together. So the questions you're asking, the message that's sending to the hiring manager, the type of homework and digging that you're doing on the manager himself, on the company, on the products or services, and what questions might you be asked, and how are you practicing and fielding those questions, and the psychology of answering certain questions and what that says about you, and looking at your own personality profile, digging into that a little bit. I talked about a legacy list. We'll pick on some college graduates. When I first came out and I got that interview in pharmaceutical sales, Chuck, you better believe I had a certificate printed of my fraternity saying I was a member. Because guess what? Everyone lies in interviews. I've been lied to multiple times. But the second I can say, hey, Chuck, turn to tab 2, you're going to see all my leadership there. There's my certificate being in the fraternity. There's all my, GPA, Dean's List awards. Now I'm building trust when I can show you, because again, anyone can put all that on a resume. But that's why I like to build these tools so that you can use them supplementally in the interview process. And we make hard copies, we make electronic versions, but they're a way to help strengthen your story, to help build likability, to help build trust, because I am a firm believer that oftentimes those are the people that get hired. I would always I have this little test for myself, and it was after I interview with someone, I would say to myself, after a long day, would I enjoy grabbing a beer with them after work? And can I trust them? And those two things, very simple, but served me fairly well in the decision-making process of hiring good people. Because we want to trust the people that we're working with. And so all of these tools that I'm talking about, they're strategies built in to this entire blueprint that I've created to help build trust and likability and those things. And finally, the last thing I will talk about is the use of personalized videos. And if you remember, Chuck, I think I sent you a thank you personalized video when we first met.
Yes, you did.
And imagine being a hiring manager or a business, even for that matter, using personalized videos as a medium to connect with people, to build likability and trust. Because the thing is, I can send you a thank you email after we interview, and that's fine, and that's typically what most people do. But what if I sent you a thank you video where now you can see my enthusiasm, my excitement? I'm talking about very particular and specific things that we talked about in the interview process in a very concise minute or so thank you video. You better believe that's going to go a long way. So, just to elaborate on a little bit more of what the Build Your Own Brand program is, and, how we're helping people stand out to be different and memorable, it's through the personalized videos, it's through the other things that I had talked about, and all of that together, and then helping people ultimately build their own brands that they're confident about and that they feel good about. Because, again, you talk about it a lot, the mindset and just the people who are prepared and people who feel really good about what they've created, they just tend to interview at a much higher level because they're so much more confident and they know that they're credible, and all of that stuff all plays so well and is so synergistic. So, that's a little bit more about the program and how it works and some of the tools that we're using to help people really stand out and be different.
Yeah, thank you. And I do remember the video you sent, and I want to know how you did that too, but it does absolutely. And I know, from the work I'm doing and some of the entrepreneurial kind of things, videos are powerful medium. So yeah, all those things you said are fantastic. I am kind of running out of time here, so let me just, if people want to get in touch with you, what's your name of your business, and what would be the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, great question, Chuck. Thank you. So, I would never turn down a connection on LinkedIn. You can never have too many friends. I would say, if something that I said today resonated and you want to, have an exploratory conversation or speak deeper to something, would be happy to. LinkedIn is a great way to connect with me there, personally, or build your own brand. There's a company a company LinkedIn profile as well. I'm on social media, all the platforms. So if you're a Facebook person, there's a Jason, profile to connect with, or to build your own brand. LinkedIn, Instagram, you name it. Or if you simply want to go to www.careercoachbyob.com, that's the company website. There's an opportunity to lock in some time, to have a free exploratory conversation. And yeah, I would say feel free to reach out. Love connecting with new people. Can never have too many good friends. And I like to think of myself as a natural connector. So I'm always looking to help people connect with, whatever it is that they're looking to connect with. And if there's someone in my network that I can help do that with, I'd be happy to make those introductions. So, please reach out.
Well, thank you so much. There was a lot there, and we could probably keep going and going. I appreciate you taking the time out, and I know the audience will be able to pull out so many good nuggets out of that. So thank you so much. And for all of you folks out there, Jason provided some really insightful things, and I talk a lot about the mindset, and one of the things with students today, whether college and high school students, the stress data is really showing that the stress levels are really increasing for whatever reason. But some of the most important or strongest areas where this shows up is getting ready for that transition, the college application process or the job application process. So behind it all, as I was alluded to earlier, your ability to kind of stand out, there are strategies involved, and behind all of that is your mindset. Your mindset's going to drive everything. It's those beliefs and values and things that you are holding on to, unresolved negative emotions. You want to weed that garden. When you do that and let your beauty really shine through, then all the strategies that you can implement to find the right job, find the right college, and do all that, now you've got tremendous confidence because you've got good strategies and your mindset's right. So what I am offering is people to get a strategy session with me. You can go to coachchuck360.com, coachchuck360.com. There'll be a QR code at the end of this. Scan that. Send me a text. You can go to the contact me section, send me a text with your first and last name, best email. And if you just say podcast gift, I'll get you a special link, because I usually charge for a strategy session where I am really kind of strategizing with you. I'm asking a whole bunch of questions to try to figure out what some of these weeds might be that we need to isolate and pull out, and what plants are already there that are doing really good. All that we find out, so I can give you a plan on how you can shape your mindset that will get you to that next level, help you remove that glass ceiling. If you then say, listen, I could really use your expertise with this, fantastic. I've got programs plenty available to offer you. If you say, oh, this is all I need, I've got it, God bless you, fantastic. I wish you all well. But it all begins with a strategy session. You won't have to pay a thing if you just use the podcast gift kind of slogan in the text and send that out to me today. And until the next time, live life to its fullest.